Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Taylor Cochran and today we have a webinar on succulent gardening tips. We have our speaker here today, the amazing Shannon Fitzpatrick. She's the manager at our Diablo location and has so much a wealth of information that she's going to share with us today. So if you're interested, stay tuned and we'll have some questions near the end. Thank you very much. Bye, Shannon.
Hey everybody, good morning from the Pleasant Hill location. Shout out to my friends and family here at the Pleasant Hill store who always let me use their room and make it so lovely and perfect and all set up with all my goodies. So big shout out to Tim and Kylia and Sam who manage this store. And Sam runs is the assistant manager here and also is the buyer for the succulent. So everything that you see behind me, Sam chose, and he's got excellent taste. So you guys are in luck that I'm here today. So Shannon Fitzpatrick, yes, from the Diablo location. I manage that store. I'm super excited to talk about succulent gardening today because it's something that's been a really big topic and something that I have learned since becoming a part of Slopes. My mother-in-law loves succulents and has always been amazing at having them in her yard, but not so much for me. I always thought of succulents as something you really had to have all sorts of in-depth knowledge on, and how can they just grow randomly, out in her yard beautifully in Concord in full sun. And that's exactly what they do. So shout out to my mother-in-law, Colleen, for introducing me and reminding me that they do grow really well out in the yard here. You can put them in any landscaping, certainly in the East Bay. I know that the climate is different in the West and in the North Bay, but a lot of these tips are going to translate no matter where you are within the Bay Area. Taylor normally teaches this class. We were just kind of laughing about how Taylor usually does the succulent webinar, and he talks a lot about indoor succulents, how you keep them fresh and clean and healthy and happy, and what light they need inside, and how you can really easily mix them with your houseplants, and how they do make great houseplants because of their needs, and etc., etc. And I certainly am not trying to reinvent the wheel. Taylor has it down how to take care of and how to choose the right succulent for your home or to keep in your office. Again, they do awesome in that scenario. But I thought, one of the things I've been learning a lot about, like I said, over the last few years, is how to use succulents outside in a landscape that is, has some similarities in terms of heat, but our climate and our soil, everything is the complete opposite of what you find where succulents grow naturally. So it's been really interesting to me to kind of delve into this whole world of adding more things to your landscape, how to design, how to give color without always having to use plants that are flowering or that are your kind of tried and true, your osteospermums and your this and that, the things that people consider staples because they can take the sun, they don't need a ton of babysitting, but then you end up with a lot of these mounding plants. So you have a yard that kind of looks like, I don't know, when you open a thing of eggs, you have all these little round egg tops. So that's what I think of yards that end up with all these small shrubs everywhere. And I love architecture when it comes to planting outside and in designing landscape. I want topography. I want a city skyline. I want some taller, straighter, more erect plants. I want some that are, kind of free-form jazz, all over the place, arms, and this leucadendron I have right here next to me is a really good example of that. I like that style that looks natural, that I guess is planned, but also has some hint of, it just grew there on its own, but blends really well together and gives you a lot of color. Gives you color year round because you don't just have to have blooms to have color, and that's part of the point of this conversation. Succulents are one of those varieties of plants where there's a million colors, and Taylor was reminding me while we were chatting that almost all of them bloom. If they're happy and they're getting the right nutrients, they're in the right place, they all send out these amazing flowers. So you don't really have to give up the things that you think of for salvias or for lavenders or anything that's your kind of go-to pollinator or for blooms. you know, we get so many bees and butterflies and hummingbirds and stuff in all of our nurseries, and they go for the succulent flowers just as much as they do any of the others. So, you know, don't be afraid to branch out of what you think of. That's what I'm hoping that this webinar will do. Will kind of expand your interpretation of what will go well in your yard and what will provide that color year round. I mean, the nice thing about succulents, and I get these questions all the time. I want something that's evergreen. I don't want it to die back. I don't want to have to be running around trying to figure out, you know, what I'm going to plant there. Is there something in front of it? I don't really want holes. In most cases, succulents do not go dormant. I mean, there are some extreme cases of frost where they'll be fussy. And in the winter, you know, it's not their favorite time. Our winter is different, and I'll get into that. But they're evergreen. So it's something that is going to allow you to have color year round. Okay, focus. So I did a outline. And if you didn't have a chance to look at it, it's on our website. It's on the same place where you would go to link up with the webinar or to look at any of our other webinars. It's under the learning tab, the what's happening tab, and then webinars. And then right there, it always has a link to today's outline. And I'm saying that because there's some information in here that I'm going to rely really heavily on this outline because I don't want to forget anything. But this is stuff that you can continue to use, you know, as you're going forward. You can revert back to it, questions, etc., etc. Okay, so just now let me start. Hi, I'm Shannon. Let's start again and get down to business. So succulent gardening, how to grow succulents in your outdoor landscape. First of all, I wanted to just kind of start with, I did a lot of research and learned a lot of stuff myself on, like, what is a succulent? What makes something a succulent? Like, what does that classification mean? So what I learned is that, quote, any plant, usually from an arid climate, that has fleshy leaves and stems to store water is considered a succulent. So these plants are the ones that have kind of evolved over time to be able to hold water in their leaves. Most succulents are fleshy. Their leaves are really thick. They store water. They soak water up there. It's why if they get squashed or broken, there's always, you know, liquid. There's always water in there. So they've adapted to be able to hold that water already in their leaves because they tend to be in climates that are super dry, super hot, and tough conditions. So there's more intermittent rain and water than kind of consistent, reliable water. Really rocky, sandy, gritty locations. It's part of why they tend to have really short root beds, which is why when we talk about planting in putting succulents and cacti in planters, they tend to be more of these, you know, shallow bowls because you don't need a ton of space for roots for most succulents and cacti. They tend to have shorter root beds. So that's one thing. And again, that's because of the soil and all of that rock and whatnot. Let's see. So varieties. There's a bazillion varieties of succulents, and succulents is kind of their classification. And I learned that that the term is succulent, and that's all the fleshy leaves, and that any of the succulents that have a spine, which is the, you know, the points, the needles, the sharp ends, that is the specifics that make them a cacti. So in general, the whole family is succulents, but the ones that have spines or have needles are considered cacti. So there's your lesson for the day. I'm telling you, I learned a ton doing research for this class because I know in general how to use them, but like getting into the how-tos and the what fors and the whys, super interesting. Okay, so cacti, sedum, aloe, agave, echeveria, sempervivum, crassulas, like kalanchoe. There's a bazillion, like I said, varieties of these. My personal favorite is an aeonium. And my favorite is an aeonium because, again, I like architecture and I like interesting shape and leaves. And these come in tons of different colors, and you get little babies that kind of pop off the side. Hopefully you guys can see that. I am my own cameraman today, so apologies. But one of my favorites about the aeonium is that they grow taller. So they're almost like sunflowers. I guess that's really what they remind me of. They tend to get taller. Their faces tend to kind of point forward and they follow the lights like most plants. And so you get this like gorgeous, again, it's like a bloom, and it's more like a bloom that doesn't ever go dormant. So I love these because you get height, you get variation. They always come in a ton of colors. This one is a really pretty purple and green. There's another really nice, this guy, oh my Lord, look at that. I mean, everybody comes in, I want something variegated. I want something variegated. Can you do better than like a green and cream and pink variegated aeonium? Just stunning. So you don't have to give up color, you know, and then just end up with this entire yard of like little green succulents. Again, they've got height, they've got texture, they've got architecture. So lots of possibility there. And again, my favorite is the aeonium. Because of this whole cactus business. Okay, so recently we were moving things around at the nursery because we have this succulent soiree going on right now. All of our stores are in the midst of a big, you know, push on succulents and really trying to educate people. And we have tons of succulents available at all of our stores. So if you are thinking of maybe trying out some succulents, now's the time. Get down to your local Sloan and try them out. But we were moving everything around at my store, and we found maybe last year that every time we tried to move the succulents, somebody was getting pricked with, you know, with one of the needles of the cactus. And so we've ordered these tongs, and they literally are like kitchen tongs. I didn't bring them with me. I meant to, my apologies. But instead of, you know, with most tongs, it has a clapper like this at the top that you can, you know, attach things to. This one has the one where it kind of dips down, and you can, so we use those tongs to help manipulate and hold on to cacti when we need to pot them up, like if we're doing custom potting. Sometimes there's no way to get your hand around those things. So we use tongs, and I recommend that any of you that are succulents, not so much, although some of these succulents have, you know, they have pointy tips. So, you know, yuccas are gorgeous and you don't think anything of it because there's no real teeth, but at the end, those things are sharp. So be careful. And like I said, we use the tongs all the time. Definitely use thick gloves. Anything that is the ones with nice thick leather on them, or the ones that have really thick rubber, those will work. Or the ones that you use for like rose pruning. Amazing. And again, I'm not going to lie and say that you're never going to get stuck with them, but they definitely help to kind of keep you a little bit safer. So really good gloves, tongs, safety goggles if you feel like you need to, if you're, you know, getting up close or there's any reason in the world, or if it's a big one that you're trying to maneuver. We potted one of those big ginormous like barrel cacti not that long ago. A customer bought one and wanted it potted, and we really Rochambeau to see like who was going to have to be the one to pot it because they're difficult. We were using like cardboard to wrap around it. It was quite a to-do. But anyway, lots of, you know, reasons to be careful when you're using cacti and when you're working with them. And sleeves. Be careful with sleeves. You know, make sure that you're as protected as you possibly can be. Use your protective equipment as much as you can with these guys. Okay, so I think in terms of intro, that's about it. They grow really well in the heat. They obviously can be used inside and outside, and you need to be careful with them as you are, you know, working with them and planting and moving even. Okay, so moving on. Now go for the Gutso. Like this is where we talk about putting them outside and not being scared to use them in your landscaping. The nice thing about this is that, you know, they're tolerant of a certain amount of neglect. And in some cases, I feel like, you know, when we're honest with ourselves, you want something that you can plant and then like do your thing, you know, go ahead, grow, be happy, fill in, you know, drink water, bloom, do everything you're supposed to do. And I don't want to have to fuss over you that much. So that's part of the great thing about putting them out in your yard is that, you know, they don't need a whole lot once you get in there. Do your research. You know, like I said, I have worked with a lot of different succulent varieties and lots of different cacti, and I have found the ones that I like the most, that I think look the best in landscaping, that I have watched do really well in yards, taking that sun, working with other conditions, you know, working well when I've amended the soil appropriately, because it's not like we have soil that's anything like where they come from naturally. So do a little research. There's a ton of different varieties out there, and they all have different looks, and they all do different things. And just the same way we have, you know, flowers that when we talk about designing pots, we do that thriller and, you know, filler and spiller. Succulents are the same way, you know, they have, this is kind of a perfect example, although I don't have a spiller. This is a sansevieria or mother-in-law tongue. Not you, mom, though, not you. This is a really good filler. And then if I were really hot to trot, which I'm not, and I had like a string of pearls or something like that, that succulent, it's a senecio, they spill forward. So exact same concept. You get them in all sorts of varieties of shapes and sizes. And so figure out what it is, the look that you're going for in the space that you're planting in your yard, and, you know, choose what works best for you and try some different things. You're like with all plants, you'll have some that are amazing and you have for 20 years, and then you'll have some that was not meant for you in your yard, and moving on. You know, don't lose too much sleep over it. I brought all of these goodies because I want to show you that companion planting is possible even with succulents. I did a webinar, I think it was last year, or maybe it was earlier this year. This has been a long year. And we were talking about doing custom pots and how to design doing, you know, really nice outside containers. And I almost always use succulents along with my summer pots. I'm a huge drought tolerant fan. A lot of the stuff that I put together, the way that I design, the way that I do pots and landscaping, especially in the East Bay, is meant for, you know, the extremes. It's meant for those 100-degree afternoons in August. If there's sun, we're planning for that. It doesn't matter what it is at any other time of the year. That's your tip for today. What are the extremes? Is it extreme shade or is it extreme sun? That's how you design your yard based around that. It doesn't matter the things that are the softies, morning sun or some shade at this time of the day. If it's getting sun in the afternoon, it is a sun area, go for it. But I really like to do companion planting. So I have here, like I mentioned, a really beautiful leucadendron. I have so many things, so you'll have to forgive me. This one is a summer red, the perfect drought tolerant plant. And again, doesn't go dormant, has really beautiful blooms, and doesn't need a whole lot of water, is okay with not great soil, tends to do really well and can be ignored. Everybody in the, you know, Bay Area knows what salvia hot lips are. They're really well known for being drought tolerant, for being huge on, you know, pollinators. Don't need a ton of water, don't need a ton of attention. I've got a really pretty eucalyptus, the silver dollar here, just because I like the color and I like, again, architecture. I have here a cordyline. This one is electric pink. And again, really good color, difference in texture. And here is my aeonium. If I was putting this in a pot, this is exactly what I would put into it. They have like needs. They all, again, drought tolerant, don't need a ton of attention, can handle the sun. With the succulent, its little pocket of dirt, supposedly in the ground or in the pot, is going to be cactus mix. All of these could do fine with cactus mix, but as long as what that succulent is sitting in is cactus mix, then it's going to be just fine. And otherwise, it has the exact same needs as this. So you can't go wrong with, you know, adding some things together that have the same, and it doesn't have to be, well, if I, you know, add succulents, then I'm just going to have succulents everywhere. No way. And like I said, you can't go wrong with this. Like, this is a euphorbia gorgeous. This is a Mongave. This is the Mission to Mars. And again, I'm going to come around because I feel like the color on this is, it's so pretty. Is that right? Yeah. Like, it's got these little purple speckles. And so having this in the yard alongside all your other goodies, like, again, it's just more texture, more color. They have the same needs. You really can't go wrong expanding your horizons. trying these, new and different varieties outside. Okay, so don't be afraid to mix it in with the stuff you've already got, because you don't have to clear cut everything just to be able to add succulents. Okay, there's so many things to talk about. I'm gonna try to hurry. Oh, and grasses and stuff too, absolutely. And what I'm talking about for the yard is the same thing for containers. This is the perfect container. Maybe the leucadendron is kind of big for unless it's a big container. We've got some big pots. So again, as long as they have like needs, it's okay. And don't be scared to use any kind of cacti or succulents included there. Okay, moving on. Okay, so this whole water thing, I have people that come in, sometimes customers into the store. I want the section where I don't have to water it. Well, I mean, there is no section that you don't have to water. There's definitely sections, which is what we're talking about, that need less water. And so succulents and cacti and all of these drought tolerant fall within that. So this means ample water during your growing season. For growing seasons, that's late spring to fall for most succulents. Daily to twice a week during the summer. And then in the winter, you want to kind of limit it just to when you see them starting to shrivel. Sometimes they'll just get really thirsty, and you can tell by looking at them. And when you water, you want, again, like most things, slow, deep watering less often. Slow, deep watering less often. I know that that is not exactly the way that most drip lines work, but I promise you that there are ways to set it up so that you are getting a longer watering session, fewer times per week, whether you're using a sprinkler, whether you're using drip, whether you are using, overhand and you are your watering machine. Always better for your plants, definitely better for your succulents. They like to be fully watered, and then they like to dry out. And again, they don't need constant watering. Do not overlove them. I think that we all tend to fall victim to that. It's hot. They must be hot. They must need water. They will rot. And it's the first thing that happens when water sits in there, or their roots are wet all the time, or their leaves are wet, or there's constant water. There's a lot of these succulents that have like little crevices. The aeonium, just because of that bud formation, is a really good example where water gets, caught in there. And once they rot, that's it. There is no coming back. There is no medicine. There is no fertilizer. There is no spray. Once they're rotten and they've been sitting in water, that's it. They can come back from not enough water. They tend to fuss at you, and like I said, get shriveled up, lean down. They, tend to kind of lose color. So they tell you when they're hot and bothered and thirsty. But when they're overwatered, it seems like they're fine, and then all of a sudden they're miserable and it's too late. So really be careful with your watering. They definitely do need to be watered, just not all the time. Okay, moving on. It's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it. So, let's talk about soil. Obviously, our soil here in the Bay Area is clay, and not at all similar to, what they grow in naturally within the desert and the areas that are arid climates. There's something else that I learned while I was studying. So what can we do in order to transform the parts of our yard that are going to be, succulent and cactus beds? Now, I'm not suggesting that if you want to plant any of these into your yard that you need to completely change out all of your soil. Again, small root beds, they don't need the entire yard changed out. They just need the section where they're going to be the kind of dirt that they grow in best, that their roots are most comfortable in, that allow that water to kind of filter through and not sit in there the way that, clay does. So you want to make sure that you can mimic that as much as possible. So Sloan has cactus and succulent mix, which is the best course of action. Especially, I'm not somebody who has all this time and space to mix all of my own soil together, and I have a pile of potting and planting and pumice and lava rock. I don't have time for that. Give me a bag or 2 or 3 of what I need, and let me just use what has already been prepared. It works way better for me. I love our cactus mix. It's very airy. It has all the components that we're talking about. It allows that water filtration. It allows that air movement. There was something specific that I read about the soil. Absolutely needs to be well draining. And that is, like I said, if you're trying to kind of turn your area of clay into an area where succulents will do well, like I said, you can just amend that area. You don't have to do the entire thing. There are a couple of amendments that if you are going to just try to amend the soil that you have there, things that will help, things like sand and perlite and any kind of potting soil or planting mix, again, whether you're putting it in the ground or putting it in a pot, that will provide the kind of drainage that they need. And that, it increases aeration and stuff with that loose soil, again, allows them to move and water. And some people come in, well, I mean, do I do perlite or do I do pumice? So I jumped into this rabbit hole yesterday, just kind of studying up on this. I'm almost embarrassed to say I never really looked into perlite. I assumed, I mean, when you look at it, it almost looks like little balls of styrofoam. And in my head, I had decided it was some outside entity and was not a natural substance. But I learned that perlite is a volcanic glass. It's water that was trapped inside lava, which becomes perlite. And it holds water, and when it's hot, it releases that water. So if you're thinking about what we're talking about, when you water something and there's perlite in the soil and it sucks that water up and it holds it, and then when it's hot, when Mr. Sun is, relentless in the summer and everything around it gets hot and that perlite warms up, it releases the water. I mean, it's perfection. It is nature at its finest, doing exactly what it needs to do for the plants that are around it. And pumice is a bubbly rock made from hot lava, created when spewed lava cools down and leaves those teeny tiny holes. And again, it absorbs excess wetness. So let's say that you are somebody who wants to overlove your succulents with water. Having pumice in there, it'll suck up that water and it'll hold on to it until it's needed. So it's not an accident that these are the things that you find in areas like that naturally act as a water absorption and to be released later, when there is no water available. I know they have deluges of rain and, kind of monsoon rains in the desert, but they're not promised, so they have to be able to hold on to water when they can. Okay, that's enough on water. If there's any questions, Taylor, you're going to have to just stop me. I'm totally on a roll because I want to get as much information in there as humanly possible. So
you're doing great.
Okay.
You're answering many questions as they're coming up, and we definitely had some about different kinds of soil and actually talking about mixing in different amendments, and you were talking about perlite, which is really helpful. Someone was definitely asking about the concept of mixing soil into the ground before planting a succulent. How necessary is it? What should they maybe do, or if it is not necessary in certain situations?
Okay.
And the cactus
yeah. Perfect. That's a good question. So, like I said, there's no real reason to rototill your entire soil and mix in all this stuff and make it a ginormous just succulent bed, unless that's your plan, unless you want everything in there to be a succulent. It's not really an easy task, as anybody who's tried to rototill the clay soil in this area, to do just that. So there's no reason that you have to, but you have to dig a big enough hole if you're not going to, again, amend everything. You're going to have to dig a big enough hole in order to be able to make sure that everything that it's touching is that soil. So if I'm putting this guy in the soil, I'm going to dig a hole that's at least twice as big as this. And then I'm going to fill the bottom with my cactus mix. I'm going to set this puppy, take it out of here, set it inside, and everything around the sides, I'm also going to fill with cactus mix, forgive me. So that everything that's touching its root system is just that that soil that has all the aeration that it needs, that has all the, water retention possibilities, all the pumice, all of the perlite, any lava rock, again, that, those pebbles that allow all that stuff to kind of move freely through there. So you can amend on your own, and there are recipes, for lack of a better term, but all of the potting soil or planting mix, depending on whether inside or outside, perlite, pumice, any kind of, like I said, lava rock or something like that, you can't go wrong with those. So if you're going to make your own, it's some concoction of those combined, and most of what you look up is going to say kind of equal parts. But you decide what makes the most sense for you. Again, I am, let's just call it lazy, and don't have as much time as I would like. I always buy the bags of pre-mixed cactus succulent mix just because I feel like I can rely on it. I dig a big enough hole, or I lay down an entire area that's just that if I'm planting up, and then I set everything on and I fill, you know, all that cactus mix within. So, you know, definitely with soil, it's a big one. It is the thing, you know, the water, like I said, is, you can mess up a little bit more. There's some give with water, but with soil, you really want it to be that kind of soil. You really want it to be that good, good and fresh and working well for what the root systems in these plants need. Okay. That's enough on soil. We talked about pumice. Okay, I'm hungry. Are you hungry? I'm always hungry. Anybody that knows me knows I am a snacking fool. So plants get hungry, and cactus and succulents are no different. Again, I feel like we think of them as these, I feel like people tend to think of them as almost like hardscape. You know, they don't always, there's not bloom constantly. You don't really have to worry about them, so you kind of put it out of your head. But anything that's out of its elements, and even though it's hot and dry here, this is not exactly their element, you know, make sure that you're fertilizing. And there's lots of different fertilizing options. We're huge on Sure Start here, which I'm sure anybody who is watching knows because we talk about it incessantly. But it is the best fertilizer for anything that you're putting in the ground. It has all of those beneficials already locked into it so that you're creating, you know, a healthy environment for your succulents and your cacti to live anyway. Cactus juice. This is another really good one. It's one that we sell here, and you follow the directions. It's a liquid, which means you can just work it in with your water. You dump a couple of capfuls in there, and you don't have to be fertilizing all the time, but it's so good for them, and it helps, you know, it helps them to grow nice and strong. It helps them to have really good color. It helps them to be able to fight off disease. It helps them to be able to make it through winters and in really hot summers. There's a lot of information out there about how good it is to have, you know, some kind of balanced fertilizer. It doesn't have to be, you know, a 5-5-5 or a whatever, although you certainly can do a balance. But look for something that tends to be a little bit stronger and more geared towards cactus and succulents. We say all the time, you know, plants can't read. There's no real reason that their picture has to be on the bag. In some cases, it's nice for them to have this one thing that's just specifically made for them because their environment is a little bit different. So once or twice annually of some kind of slow release. If you were going to do like an osmocote or something like that, or even a granular like the Sure Start, those are granulars that break down over time, that dissolve over time, that work into the system, into the soil, into the roots. Over time, they have to be watered, life has to happen, and they slowly disintegrate. And so that's fine if you're doing that, you know, just kind of for your annual or every 6-month feeding, no problem. But if you're doing one that's like a weaker liquid solution, then you can do it more on a monthly basis. So the cactus mix or the cactus juice that I'm showing you here. There's another one that we sell that's by Schultz, and I think it's called Cactus Food or Succulent Food or something like that. Forgive me, I can't remember. But those, you know, you can do a little bit more often, and you're just going to mix them in with your watering. So in a watering can is fine. In a bucket is fine. A 5-gallon bucket is fine. Anything that makes it easy for you, just to make sure that you're giving them some vitamins and some food along the way. Okay, to sun or not to sun? That is the question. That's always the question in the Bay Area. It was hot this summer. It wasn't as hot as it was last summer, I'll give you that, but it was humid and it was different and it felt like it took forever. And I know I shouldn't say anything because I don't want to jinx it. I have no desire to go back to those 90-degree days. But succulents and cacti do just fine in the sun. So you don't be afraid to, get out there and put them in this area. The sun in our area is not that different from, in Arizona or in the desert in New Mexico where these things grow naturally. So you don't have to be afraid to have them in an area that has a lot of sun. It's just that, again, you have to be doing all these other things. It has to have the right soil. It has to have the right and timing for water. It has to have some kind of food given to it. But if that's the case, they can take 6 to 8 hours of, full sun for a day. It gives them better color. They flower a lot more often and more freely without you standing around like, look, it's been a year. Come on, put your show on. So making sure that they're getting enough sun is definitely a good idea. There are, and again, my research, there are some shade varieties. If you have an area that is a little bit shadier, but you've been dying to really kind of put some succulents and some cacti in there and add to that setup, there are some that do better. Say things like jade. There are some foxtail agaves, which is an attenuata. My botanical names are not the best, so you guys will have to bear with me. An elephant foot, which is it's a portulacaria, or not a portulaca, a portulacaria. So it's one variety. There's a lot of sedums like the burro's tail. They tend to do a little bit better in shady areas. Things like the string of pearls or the string of bananas, the strings of pretty much anything that are senecio, they will do, just fine in a little bit of a shady area. They don't have to have quite as much sun, and they will, be fine and still produce and still be healthy. So there's no reason, the same way that there's lots of plants that do well in sun versus shade, you can't really go wrong. Oh, Christmas and spring cactus. Shout out to my guy, Chris Dobbins, who works with me at the Diablo store and is probably watching. He is huge on Christmas cactus. He is the person in his family that they have been passed down to, and he's always asking for extra tips on how to take care of them. Christmas cactus and spring cactus, they do fine in a shadier area also. They don't have to have extreme sun. So that's another one that you can use in a shade area if that's what you've got. Okay. And then finally, overwintering your succulents and your cacti. So I didn't bring it with me, but I was laughing with Taylor earlier. I was going to grab a thing of frost cloth, but my tablecloth is made out of frost cloth, so I'm kind of cheating. All of our stores sell frost cloth. It's probably the best protectant for succulents and cacti during the winter. Not every winter are they going to need them. They can take some cold weather. They can take some freezing temps. Again, there are some that take it better than others, and I'll talk about that in a second. But again, in their natural habitat, the desert gets freezing at night. If anybody, has spent time in the desert at night, even during the summer, it gets cold. And so they're confident and comfortable even in cold weather. It's just, with us, there's a lot of rain when there's rain. There's a lot of rain and cold and these consistent freezing temps, and this other thing over here is getting watered, and maybe your succulents don't want or need as much water during, the winter time. They just need enough to be able to keep them from, totally shriveling up like I mentioned earlier. But on those nights where we have frost warning after frost warning after frost warning, cover them up just like you would your citrus, just like you would some of your kind of tender winter annuals. Throw a big frost cloth kind of over your area that's got, a good amount of succulents in it, and it'll help protect them just from that frost. They definitely can make it in cold weather. It is not a problem. But when it's extended and it's frosty nights over and over and over again, use some kind of frost cloth. There are some sprays. I'm not a huge fan on sprays unless you actually have to, but a little bit of water and then, letting them dry out like they like to, and then just cover them with the frost cloth. So I was looking up, which ones do better in which areas. And I found that there's some mountainous varieties that can take more cold that you don't have to worry so much about. So things like sempervivum and the hardy sedums, you don't have to worry about those. Opuntias, which I'm not even positive what that looks like. I was going to ask Taylor about that earlier. And agaves, they tend to be able to take, they're a little bit harder. Their leaves are not as supple and watery. If you've seen some of those agaves, they're tough. They've got really strong and thick and almost like not rubbery, but kind of rubbery. So they can take the cold a lot easier. The ones that are a little more fussy that you have to be aware of are things like the echeveria, which I don't have. Oh, there's some here in this little pot. So some of these little guys are echeverias, and they are a little bit more sensitive to the cold. So that's something that you have to watch out for. And what else? And then aloes. Anybody who has like medicinal aloe at home knows that they can be kind of fussy during the winter. They lose their color if they're getting like soaked. If we have, rains like we had this last winter, they can be unhappy. I'm not suggesting you're standing out there with an umbrella or anything, but on those days, you're just gonna have to kind of keep an eye on them and make sure that they're covered at night with that frost cloth, so that, they can have some kind of protection. Phew.
Yeah, nice. Wonderful recap on all the ring of the succulents around. You were mentioning the apuntias. They're the ones that look like little bunny ear kind of plants that have the really fuzzy spines that when you touch them, they get stuck to your hands. So do not touch them. Or they're like the prickly pear cactuses are also the apuntias, the ones that produce those fruits and stuff. I have some amazing questions. People are so engaged today. Thank you so much for all the questions. I hope I'm answering many of them and they're the helpful ones. And anything, like I was saying, that have more specific stuff that you want us to maybe diagnose, absolutely bring in a sample, bring in some pictures, put in a little baggie if you are bringing a sample to our stores, and we'll check on them and actually give you a little bit more guidance on something more specific. But I have some good ones to go over. One that maybe we can talk about right now is someone was asking, it's a common question and something that's really good to talk about, is why do my succulents become overly leggy?
That's a good question. I mean, that's true for most plants. Most succulents tend to get leggy when they're reaching for light. When they're maybe not getting as much sun or not in an area that's getting enough light, they tend to want to reach. Although I was always so scared to cut succulents back, and I have learned that it's okay. You can, if they get too leggy and you lost track somewhere along the way and now it's just lightweight, out of control and not the way you want it, you can trim them back. You can cut it at an area that makes sense. Let's use this guy for instance, and he has a couple of dead leaves down here, so I'll stop pretending that they're not there and we'll use this as an example.
I think it's also a great thing to talk about is that succulents in general and plants in all time, their leaves are not permanent, and especially succulents, as they're growing up, those bottom leaves are the first ones to die back, and it's absolutely natural.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we say all the time, they're like, oh, well, it's all messy at the bottom. Yes, it is. You're going to have to pull those leaves off. With succulents, they grow from the middle. They're like a fountain, and a lot of plants are that way, but most succulents are, when you're looking at an aloe or an agave of any kind, they kind of come from the middle and open up like a flower, like a floret. And so all those leaves on the bottom are the oldest leaves. So it's like Taylor said, it's not unnatural or ridiculous that they are the ones to die off. So anyway, let's say this one was, 3 feet and it just had this one big head and nothing down below, and I wanted to kind of shrink my line of sight. You can cut it, and then some people use rooting powder, some people do not. But I learned that you can just replant the stub, and that it will root and it will, grow like you never did anything, like you never touched it. Now, what I don't know, and Taylor, maybe you can answer this, is, and this one's a really good example because, like I said, it has a little baby coming off the side there. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but anyway, then what happens to that bottom nub, Taylor? Like, will that just die out, or will that bloom again if it's shorter? What happens?
It's a great question. It actually leads into another question that we were going to go into about pruning succulents. And there was a question about timing on that, and I can mention that in a second. But when you're saying is when you cut off when you cut off the stalk and you take away for the aeoniums or echeverias or anything that kind of forms a little bit of a trunk almost, you cut off, you can absolutely replant that top part, but that bottom part will actually, it'll branch out. All those little areas where the leaves come out of and grow from, those little nodes that are happening, are totally a space that the plant can grow another whole head and multiple of them sometimes. Sometimes you can go from one stalk into 5. And then you get a very bushy, full succulent that actually has more flowers on it next year. So it's really a process of aging and growing. And I think pruning is very important.
It's funny because we talk often, especially at the nursery, people come in all the time with, I just was so scared to cut it back. Because I feel like it seems counterintuitive. They always tell you when you want your hair to grow, go get a haircut, which seems like, why in the world? That's exactly the opposite. But it spurs on that new growth. And it's true for plants, like Taylor is saying, that you give it a good cut, you replant it, you bring some of that energy back down into the roots instead of having to send that energy from the tiny little root bed, 3 feet up in the air to this bloom that's up, or this head that's up at the top. Bring that down to a level that it can more easily work with and keep healthy. And then you get all this fullness as opposed to tallness.
Yeah, and it's across the board in all the plant world, but succulents are really easy and they're very rewarding when you do it because they do it very quickly. And to speak on the timing, I think here in our more temperate region and our a little bit easier kind of timeline, we don't have as much of a strict regulations on freezing periods and stuff like that. The things you should maybe worry about is if we're going to have a very heavy rainstorm or anything like that, avoid cutting your succulents maybe right before that, because that can cause extra water to build up in those cut areas, and that can cause a rotting situation. As well as there's not a lot of leaves for the plant to pull the water up from the ground at that point, so it can rot a lot easier if it's cut at that point and then it gets a lot of water. As well as if you cut it right before the big growing season, like in spring, it'll induce the growth really fast. And so if you cut it in the fall or something going into winter, similar reason for the water, it might be a little bit slower and it might not have as good a success of just putting out growth right away. But right before spring is, I think, a great time to cut them. Although all year is fine.
Right, absolutely. I mean, they are, like you said, and that's I think a really important thing to remember is that they are forgiving. They are, most drought tolerant plants are, but like he said, specifically the succulent world is very forgiving, and you have numerous opportunities to prune, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Let me, cut that and kind of replant it and hope for the best with this one. And again, that's why having some kind of feeding regimen is good for them, because then they're constantly getting that nourishment that they need to whatever the next step is, or to even kind of just make it through whatever the tough times are, when, again, too hot, too cold, not enough water, too much water, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I actually have another question I really wanted to go into more. We can kind of talk about it. Is someone has echeverias and they're growing them and they have them in the ground. And I think I really want to talk about maybe the life cycle of those kinds of succulents. And we mentioned it with the leaves dying out on the side and how that's a very natural process. As it grows up, the leaves die back on the sides. But they were mentioning that the leaves were dying on the inside of the newest growth. And that is something to be a little bit more concerned about. And do you maybe have some ideas about when the inner parts are the ones dying away first, maybe what they should look towards?
That's a good question. I mean, again, I always, checklist in my head. Okay, so how is it getting watered? What are the outside factors that could be creating that? Is there some kind of infection of some kind? Like, is it being attacked by something? Is it something fungal? Is it something insecticidal? Did something get onto it? Is there something burrowing in there? Did some animal, squash it, or, something like that? And then that's just the pieces that are kind of trying to come back. Again, with leaves on the inside,
I think you're keying into a lot of different things that I would also.
Like I said, it's so hard to kind of find the right thing. And again, it's really dependent on, when I get these questions, we walk through all these things. Okay, so tell me about where it is. Tell me about how you're caring for it. Again, when things are dying on the inside, I tend to pull them out, get it cleaned up as much as possible. Anything that looks like it's dead, really giving it a good once over. And it's not that I don't understand that can be difficult, especially in the yard. And the thing about these that makes them so beautiful is that like kind of tight clustering, but it's also the thing that makes it virtually impossible to really get in there and see what's going on. Again, I would, try to do some digging around, see if I can see something that is not obvious, but might help to explain what is happening and why it doesn't seem to be as happy. And then if I felt like it needed some kind of assistance that was some, outside repellent or, then I would start with something a little bit softer. I always try to start with like maybe some kind of soapy water or something. If it's just some insect like aphids or something that have gotten on there, some cleanup, or maybe a neem oil if necessary. What do you think, Taylor?
Yeah, I love the idea into really diagnosing it yourself, and I think the first step of clearing away the dieback is probably your first step to really see what's maybe going on. And I even think about it too, but it could totally be just something that smashed it and squashed it, and it could just like the leaves were broken. But it also definitely could be some bugs, different kinds of mealybug or aphids or anything like that getting into those little newest, little tenderest leaves, and they're the tastiest. So that's definitely could be affected. I'm guessing because it's an echeveria, most likely it is a situation of excess water. I think they were mentioning that they were watering once a week, and that could be okay, but that could be too much. And also, if it is a little bit of a cooler season and you're watering into the center of the plant, because you want to make sure that the roots get watered, but maybe you're watering overhead into the center of the plant, that could cause a little bit of damage, and it could be an overwatering situation. I feel like dying back from the center, if it's not a bug or anything like that, it's most likely excess moisture in a succulent. If it was drying out, it would be dying from the side first, I would say. But there's a lot of different things that can go into that. So it's always an interesting question, and it's very fun to diagnose, but sometimes it could be a little bit hard if you're by yourself and maybe you're not as familiar with the plant in your own garden.
Yeah, I would totally. I mean, I think the interesting piece of this is, don't be afraid to get in there and see what's going on. A lot of times, and not that we're saying don't bring it in if you have a question, but you're going to learn a lot about what your plants do and don't like, because there's so many generalities and us saying, oh yeah, they love this and oh, they hate that. But maybe your plant, for whatever reason, because of your soil, because of the area, because of the way that the light is filtering through and maybe not as strong, maybe there's something different about the situation that it's in, and you're the one that knows that the best. So don't be afraid to kind of get in there, take a look around, see what you think. Again, I will say 1,000 times, too much water is not your friend. Do not overlove with water. Do not overlove with water. Again, I get it. We're hot, we're sweating and miserable, and our immediate thought is, oh my God, they're probably, just really thirsty and super dried out. You would be surprised. Nature has a way of righting itself as long as the right components are there. So don't be afraid to get in there and dig at things, and keep in mind that too much water is not, adding water is not the answer to every problem.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very good point. I know we're kind of getting to the end of our hour or so, but I have a few quick questions we can answer before we end today, and appreciate everyone for staying here and listening to these questions and asking them, of course. And I think a very simple one also just kind of go over is, why are my succulents changing color, and why are the edges going red?
Yeah, so I mean, they do definitely pick up color during the sun. If you're in the East Bay, and again, I haven't lived in San Francisco for a really long time, and I have not ever lived in the North Bay, but I realize that their sun situation is fairly similar to the East Bay. You're going to get more color the more sun that they're getting. So if it's something that looks like a healthy color, and it is, again, I was mentioning with the aeonium here, like the paddles, they get these really pretty like red tips around the ends. Any of the euphorbias and hold on, I know I have one. Yeah, like the sticks on fire, they get super red at the ends. I mean, and that's part of their show. Is kind of what they do. So if it's just something that is their natural color at that time of the year, and in that situation becoming brighter or more intense, then there's nothing for you to worry about. If you think it's getting burned, it's entirely possible. And if it is getting burned, then you may want to think about its soil and its water and its feeding, because again, they can take sun, they can take full sun, assuming that those other three things are taken care of. So if you think it's burning and not just the natural color coming out, then check those other three boxes and see if there's anything there that maybe you need to work on.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I think it's really It's a really interesting thing, especially in succulents. We see it the most, but in lots of different plants, they all change color. They go from darker to lighter, from more reds to purples to more greens, depending on their sunlight. And generally, more sun usually means more color, which a lot of times is desired. So we want them to be kind of pretty and bright and colorful. But if it goes too far, it might be a little bit brown or dying away, and that's a bit more extra sun stress. But it's something I also wanted to mention when you were mentioning the aloes and how they sometimes get sun stressed, and they are ones that don't actually like it too much. And if you see really beautiful, like the medicinal aloe veras that we all like to grow for skincare and stuff like that, they're one of those plants that we do actually like to have a little bit more of a shadier situation for them. They don't like as much sun because they will develop that red, but when they develop that red color, their insides are actually not super great. They don't actually smell as good. They don't work as good on our skin. So they actually like that a little bit less sunlight for the more medicinal use. But in nature, they will grow red because that's just how they do it.
Yeah. I mean, this also goes back to really do your research. You know, think about the spot that you have, how much sun it's getting. And again, in the East Bay, you're looking at afternoon sun. The morning sun is nice, precious, beautiful sun. And afternoon sun is like overbearing and harsh. And if your area is full sun and with no shade, you really want to do some research and make sure that you're picking the right succulents and cacti for that area. It's the same thing with them as it is with any other plant area. You know, you can't throw a hosta or a fern, you know, in a full sun area in the afternoon in the summer. But you know, there's some that you can. So you have to just make sure that you're doing some research, that you're getting the right size, the right color, the right whatever, and also, you know, the right one for the situation that you have light-wise.
And we're all learning as we go, and we will help out as much as we can. But even us, we learn everything every day about new plants and new varieties and how they grow. So yeah, I think we are coming pretty much to our end. Is there any last notes or anything else you'd like to shout out?
A couple last things that I just want to mention. One is the sansevieria. I know that we tend to speak on this and look at this as more of a house plant. It is actually a succulent, and this is another one that does really well in companion planting. So again, you get that nice architecture, that more erect, stiff leaf that you can use, you know, within outside areas that are landscaped or inside pots. So, you know, don't be afraid to kind of jump around from different areas within the succulent and cacti family. And then also just kind of a shout out on pottery. If you're doing these in a container or in some kind of pot, again, you can use the ones that are, sure, we have these really pretty rustic hexagonal bowls, and they're nice and shallow. They do really well with roots there. There's little ones and definitely some big ones. They're just gorgeous. And then the other really lovely one that I use all the time is our talavera. And if you're not a fan of our Southwest talavera, there's lots of different examples here, but these are beautiful and they pair so well with all of the succulents and cacti. They give you kind of that nice Mediterranean desert style look. So, you know, don't be afraid to try a pot. If you're not sure about putting it in the ground quite yet, do an outside pot, you know, do it out there in the yard where you can control, you know, the circumstances a little bit better. And then when you feel confident, you know, maybe then you can pop it into the ground. But I guess at the end of the day, I just want you to feel comfortable knowing that you can add these to your landscaping and not have to worry and still be able to enjoy all that the succulent world has to offer.
Yeah.
That's it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for staying around, asking questions. Please join us in our next classes. We have ones on rhododendrons. I'm teaching a class on low light houseplants. I'm absolutely going to be talking about sansevieria. So if you have some questions about those, we'll be talking about that, as well as more pruning classes and other stuff going into our winter season. So thank you everyone again. Hope you have a good rest of your Sunday or Saturday, and anyone in the future watching these videos, appreciate it, and hit us with, I guess, a like or anything like that. All right, have a good one, and thank you again, Shannon.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.